All right, let's turn our focus a little bit. I said we were going to do this. The top 30 prospects for every team dropped Monday morning, so we're gonna take a look at this and see kind of what the Phillies are like. So, really, no surprise. We kind of knew who the top four were going to be because the top 100 was released back in February, and it had them in this order, which was Painter, Abel, Miller, Crawford. There's no surprise there, even with Painter out for the season with Tommy John. He's still the number one prospect in the organization. Abel's still fending off Miller and Crawford, even though I think a lot of people, including myself at times, have kind of been down on Abel after kind of a rough go of it last season. But Starling Caba, a guy who's really come on the scene despite being just 18 years old, all the way up to number 5. I think he was around 13, 14 at the end of last season. So big jump for him. Some Lindor comps. Don't want to put too much stock into that. Orion Kirkering here at 6. I'm not even going to count him. He's a major leaguer. I know he still has like rookie service time or whatever, but to me, I don't count him as a prospect anymore. But he's there at number 6. This is where it gets interesting. A lot of big jumpers here. Devin Saltaban, I don't know if I'm saying that right, but he was the third round pick in 2023 last season, and I guess it was their second pick. They didn't have a second round pick last year, did they?
They did not because of Turner.
Yeah. So this was technically the Phillies' second pick last year, and out of Hawaii, actually, which is cool. So another middle infielder that the pipeline is high on with the Phillies. And then another one, Brian Rincon, right behind him, just 20 years old. And then the guy we've kind of talked about a lot, Eduardo Tait, 17-year-old catcher, already up as the Phillies' number 9 prospect. I think he was 20-something at the end of last season. Big jump for him. He's not going to be here for a while. They are going to have to find a stopgap between the end of this Realmuto contract and Tait if he works out. But huge jump for him. And then Gabriel Ricones Jr., kind of been around a little bit. College guy, big power bat, outfielder. Griff McGarry sticking at 11. I think that's where he kind of finished last year. Bergola, I think he's like maybe a less athletic Caba. Good defender, really, really good eye. Don't think like all the other wow skills are there, like the running ability and maybe some of the hit tool. But Carlos De La Cruz, I don't know what's going to happen with him. Kind of just sit in the middle there. Big power bat, obviously 6'8". Then we got, I'm trying to look for some other guys. McFarlane dropped a little bit, or McFarlane, because of his Tommy John surgery, I'm pretty sure he had. Simon Muzziotti, I can't believe they got him through waivers. I mean, he's in here as the number 19 prospect. That was actually impressive that they got him through waivers and were able to keep him in AAA. And then, 2 of these guys they got in that like weird trade they did with the Brewers. I think it was, where is he? It was this guy, I'm pretty sure. Oh, no. Which one was it?
Wasn't it? It was Mendez.
Oh, Mendez. Yeah, Mendez. There we go. Yep. So they got him, and they got, I believe, Robert Moore was the other one. Yeah, out of the Brewers. So, I mean, they got 2 top 25-ish prospects in that trade. I mean, that was kind of an interesting trade they made. Now, I don't know where these guys would be in a deeper system, but it's really not a bad trade. And Ethan Wilson hanging on there at 28, a guy that he was like 5th a couple of years ago, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. They got him in the COVID draft, the year that the draft was only 5 rounds. He was like their second or third round pick.
Yeah. So nothing too out of the ordinary. I just don't know what sticks out to you with the top 30 heading into the 2024 season.
So low key, one of my favorite prospects that it kind of started as a joke that just kind of popped up on my Twitter feed, but our number 14 prospect, Wenhui Pan, I saw like his tweet when the Phillies initially signed him, and I was joking around with my friends because the tweet was in, the Japanese speed barometer, so it was like his fastball was 168 like kilometers per hour or whatever. And I was like joking around that he threw like 168 mile per hour fastball, and like he didn't. They signed him. He was really young when they signed him, and all of a sudden, like the first year after they signed him, he was like late 20s, and now he's up to 14. So like the stuff is there, and he has a good fastball and a decent
Yeah.
curveball. I think. I don't know much beyond that initial tweet and the fact that he's kind of jumping up the rankings a bit, but it'd be interesting to see if he would, be able to keep rising and then eventually get to the majors in a year or two, kind of what that does as far as their Japanese footprint goes. I know
Yeah.
this guy was young and he didn't really have any track record in the Japan League. I think he kind of just skipped the Japanese League and came right over. So it's not like one of these Otanis or Sasaki's that have, the ginormous following and the track record, but just an interesting tweet that I saw a few years ago, and now he's a top 15 prospect. And kind of just we know for the most part about the top 10 and what they
Hmm.
are. Obviously, Miller and Kaba are the two that stick out the most to me.
Right.
But I remember, I think he got drafted last year. The George Clausen, number 29, his off-speed stuff doesn't grade out very well. He's got a 70 grade fastball. I think they drafted him. He's throwing 101 or 102 consistently at Minnesota.
Yeah. Oh, I
So he
remember
throws
that.
gas.
Yeah.
If they could kind of, obviously, the Kirkring slider he kind of had in college, and
Can't pitch.
they just worked with it a little bit.
Hmm.
Um, so it was kind of like Kirkring had that. But if they can develop any type of slider with Clausen and he's throwing, 102 off of it,
Yeah.
yeah, the control's an issue, 100%. But
Yeah.
with how they've been developing pitching, Ben Brown came out of nowhere a few years ago. They're
Right.
kind of the McGarry motion this year in two
Hmm.
spring training outings is very Spencer Strider-esque in terms of windup. Obviously, he got rocked a little bit yesterday, but the first outing was really good. So if they could kind of fix his mechanics, the biometrics lab is definitely a game changer in terms of slowing everything down and getting good technique in terms of mechanics for especially pitching. If they could develop anything with Clausen, like that's a guy with a chance to be an elite back end piece just solely off of him throwing, 102 with high spin rates. So those are kind of the two that stick out to me. And I think a lot of that's just because of the way the Phillies have kind of shown their ability to work with young pitching and develop them over the last year or two.
Yeah. There's one guy I want to talk about, and it's Boyd here. This guy is Roman Quinn 2.0. The run is 70, and everything else is kind of like average or below. I think he stole like an insane amount of bases last year. Yeah, he sold 56 bases last year. Crazy numbers. I don't know if he's ever going to be anything, but that speed is nuts. I'd be interested in seeing him at some point. But one point I did want to make was this is an incredibly young farm system, actually. Like Painter's 20, Abel's a little older, 22, will be 23, I think, before the end of the season. Miller's
Mm-hmm.
19, Crawford's 20, Kaba 18, Saltaban, I know I'm saying that wrong, 19, Rincon 20, Tai 17. Like a lot of these guys in your top 10 are young, and you look at their ETAs, and we just got done talking about how much money the Phillies have tied up to like 4 or 5 guys in 2027. A lot of these guys could be up by then to fill those spots that you need to, to be cheap to keep a team on the field that's competitive. So a lot of these guys ETAs line up perfectly with kind of a weird financial situation for the team.
Yeah, and I think another thing, if you kind of look at it, obviously, you touched on it when you were, bouncing off of Kaba to Saltaban to Bergola. A lot of middle infielders. Obviously, it's it's difficult to teach middle infield, so it's much easier to move a guy off of that. But
Hmm.
I think with how you have the infield shaping up, obviously Bohm is looming as far as his team control in the next few years. I think ideally, if we're talking about young guys, I think Stott's the one guy we want extended.
Yeah.
And as far as expendability, it probably goes Stott, the least expendable. And if with Harper being permanent full time first base, Bohm's probably the most expendable. So if you
Yeah.
don't, necessarily extend Bohm and you want to give Aiden Miller the shot at third base, which they definitely should. The kid's a stud. You have a lot of middle infielders floating around with Turner here for 8 more years and Stott hopefully here for just as long. So you don't want to get in a Scott Kingery situation where you're trying to teach a kid center field and their offensive ability gets zapped.
Hmm.
Obviously, it wasn't all to blame for Kingery's, fall off, but it definitely is something trying to learn a completely different position, especially one that important. So you might see these guys as trade bait down the line. If the White Sox struggle again this year and you need an outfielder because somebody got hurt or Schwarber's contract's up soon or Castellanos is looking to get moved,
Right.
go get a Lou Bob with some of these top prospects. Or if you need a starter at the deadline, I know the talk a few months ago or a month ago was the Guardians wanted Justin Crawford for Emmanuel Clase. Like,
Hmm.
you have a lot of these young pieces that, if you do extensions the right way, are somewhat blocked in terms of their path to the major leagues. So I think, we're a few months away, a few years away from really exploring trading with this built up farm system that Mattingly and Barber have done a really good job of kind of stocking young talent in.
Yeah, I'm a little hesitant to throw someone like Kaba or Tait in a trade right now because I think 2 or 3 years from now, one, these guys could be like top 50 prospects that could bring you back a haul like 10 times
Mhm.
better than they could today. And second, they could also just be so good that you want to hold on to them. Like I'd be interested if Kaba in a few years pushes so hard, what they do. Let's say Miller works out, he's at third. Is Trey Turner moving to left field at age 35? Like I just think that's something to keep an eye on. What could happen down the road. I mean, already as the number 5 prospect at 18, and Ronald Acuna Jr.'s brother is on the way. He's 12.
Yeah, that was
So
absurd.
yeah, he's 12. He's verbally like committed to the Phillies. This is like freaking football recruiting, which I deal with all the time. Because he can't like legally sign until he's 16,
They
right?
can't sign him until 2028.
Yeah. So I like, what are we doing here? Like he could flop that. So like I'm not even getting my hopes up about that. But yeah,
Yeah,
the
you are.
youngest. No, I'm not.
Yes,
The
you
the
are.
the youngest Acuna brother might be coming to the Phillies, and it'll be kind of interesting to see. But yeah, I mean, there's 10 outfielders in the top 30 here for the Phillies, and quite literally, like half them, not more than half them, are like the same player.
Yeah.
They're like these little dudes who hit for contact and run fast. Like De La Cruz. I think is the only one with above average power. Racones does a little bit too, but he has a lot of swing and miss in his game as well. So yeah, I'm interested to see what they do. What was it? They shot down a trade with Tait and Racone over the offseason?
I don't know if they shot down a trade, but I know teams kicked the tires on them. I don't
Right.
think it ever came out explicitly, but I think just in trade negotiations, teams brought them up, and the Phillies
Hmm.
said no. I think it might have been Kaba and Rincon or Kaba
Okay.
and Tait, but yeah, I don't. I know the only, at least as far as I saw, the only trade that got shot down with names was Guardians for Clase, and it started with Crawford.
Hmm. Yeah. So obviously, other teams are interested in these guys, which is, I guess, good news. I think we're going to see what happens at the trade deadline. And I mentioned this to you at the trade deadline last year when they really didn't do much. They just got Lorenzen for God, his name's slipping my mind, but Lee
Um,
Lee Lee.
yeah,
Like a guy that was not going to play here because he's just a straight second baseman, and Bryson Stott's going nowhere. So technically, like to me, they didn't give up anything.
right.
Um, I said, look, you didn't really give up anything the last two deadlines now. Like, yeah, Ohape for Marsh was like a somewhat significant trade, but like your farm system's kind of loading up now. So I
Yep.
expect you to be a little more aggressive at the next deadline because you're gonna have a lot more in the system and you're gonna have another draft under your belt.
Yeah,
So I,
and
I am I'm curious to see how that goes.
Middleton and Dombrowski kind of hinted at that.
Yeah,
They've kind of said that there's no rush to really go get a Montgomery and Snell. Obviously, getting them in, you know, March as opposed to August can definitely be the difference between a few games in the division. But realistically, you, I'd almost rather. I mean, the Braves are so good,
hmm
but the Phillies have a roster that's good enough or should be good enough to at least hang with them a little bit, where the division shouldn't be wrapped up by June or July like it has been the last few
right.
years. So I'm not opposed to waiting until middle of July towards the deadline to evaluate. Last year the Phillies were really healthy. You can't necessarily bank on that this year. So see
hmm
where the injury bug falls and see what you need come that time, as opposed to, oh my God, we need another starter right now. We have to
Right.
sign one of the two available. Whereas in July, you might not have a Snell or Montgomery available, but there will be other guys that you can potentially, pry away from certain teams depending on where they're at in the standings.
Yeah, obviously Corbin Burns no longer gonna be a thing, but none of those Marlins guys got moved. Dylan Cease did
Mm-hmm.
not get moved. The Mariners, I don't know what the hell they're doing, but they didn't touch any of their guys, even though for some reason they're rumored to get rid of those guys, even though I think like on paper might be the best rotation in the game right now. So
Yeah.
there are going to be options. I'm interested like a team like the Blue Jays, like they got some pitching and that team's kind of like meh. Like they're like good enough to like slip in the playoffs, but no one takes them seriously as a World Series contender. So I'm interested if they try to sell high on a couple of their guys too. So I think there are going to be some options out there. But yeah, I just think waiting until you have another draft under your belt, like maybe someone like what happened this past year where Miller fell to you, the same thing happens. A really good player falls to you, and then you're more comfortable moving off of one of your other big time prospects because now you have this guy who wasn't you didn't think was going to be in your long term plans, and now he is. So I
Mm-hmm.
do expect them to be more aggressive when the deadline comes around.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so that's going to do it for this one. We'll be back sometime in the middle of March for a spring training update, and then it'll be the season preview episode. So be on the lookout for those in the coming weeks. We'll see you then.